Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for this week's edition of Inside the Zone. It's week 5 of the high school football season. We barely were able to pull Justin away from the television watching all that NASCAR going on down in Indianapolis.
Still going around in ovals last time I checked.
They're turning left. That's the latest update I've gotten. Let's start with the SAC because unlike NASCAR, everything is different every time around.
It's true.
We're talking about a conference where at the beginning of the season, I don't think we knew who was going to be the top team. And that seemed at the time like it was going to kind of be a bummer. But man, it's been an exciting week-to-week conference because you never know what's going to happen. Point being, Northrop goes out and slays Carroll by 20 points this past season.
Yeah, how about that? Congratulations to Coach Jason Dorfler. You look at wins that can propel a program to the next level. Northrop has been looking for that for years under Jason Dorfler. Could this be it? We hope so if you're a Northrop Bruins fan because they've kind of laid the groundwork over the last couple of years. That offense has always been good. Defense just couldn't get enough stops to get that big win. Almost knocked off Wayne a couple weeks ago, and then they come out and just lay the wood to Carroll last Friday night.
Well, they're 2-2, and they had 5 consecutive seasons of 2-8, so yeah. I feel fairly confident that they're going to exceed previous season's record. So we'll hear more from them. Possible team of the week on Tuesday here on Wayne
tease.
TV. Yeah, well, I pretty much just gave it away. But let's talk about Bishop Dwenger at Carroll. That's one of the marquee games this week in this conference. Carroll obviously going to try to bounce back after that loss. They made too many errors, and Northrop played a perfect game.
Yeah.
Credit to Northrop. They took advantage when Carroll made errors. What do you do if you're Doug Dynan to get ready for a Dwenger defense that is the best defensive unit we've seen so far this season?
It has, and it should be an interesting matchup because Gavin Vogt has just week after week been able to throw the ball all over the field, has over 1,000 yards passing, 11 touchdowns. Of course, about half of his yards have gone to Camden Childers. So that is obviously a big challenge for the Bishop Dwenger defense, but they were able to rise to the challenge last week when they had to limit Trevin Taylor and Griffin Little, wide receivers for Homestead. So they were able to do that most of the game. Gave them a chance to win when that offense picked it up in the second half. So what do we expect? Maybe a lower scoring game like we saw last Friday? I think that's key for Bishop Dwenger.
Conversely, Bishop Dwenger at the beginning of the season, we had a new head coach in Jason Garrett, taking over for Chris Schwarzkopf after 15 years. We were kind of wondering how was he going to put his stamp on this team? What level were they at? How good were they really? Man, they've answered every question, and they face adversity in games like being down against Homestead and then coming back and winning on the road.
Yeah, and that takes a lot of moxie, obviously, especially when you have Patrick O'Keefe go out in the second half. You put in Brendan Lytle, the sophomore, phenomenal athlete, but you could tell he just wasn't entirely comfortable behind center, but he made enough plays to lead Bishop Dwenger to the win. So it feels like that typical Bishop Dwenger team where after you watch them, you're not wowed. You're wowed by a TJ McGarry or a TJ Tipman, but overall, it's not an overwhelmingly dominant performance. It's just solid, it's physical, they get a win, and they move on to the next week. It's just kind of one of those typical Dwenger teams.
Very businesslike, I guess is how I would describe it. Homestead at Snyder, another big game in the SAC this week. Last year, this Week 5 game was played on a Saturday at Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yeah.
It's a big-time game for both teams. For Homestead, if you want to even compete for an SAC championship, even in this crazy season, this is really a must-win game for them. And I know it's still early, but it is.
Yeah, and I feel like we talk about business-like. I think Snyder over the last 2 weeks has been that business-like team. They go out and trounce Carroll or Concordia by 30. They take care of business last week. Now you could look at, okay, now they have a step up in competition in terms of Homestead. As good as Concordia is, it's a 3A team trying to take on Snyder. So where is Snyder at? I think Snyder is kind of that sneaky, hey, don't forget about us kind of team. And this week is the week to prove it that they are still in contention.
I was just talking about this with Andy. We're getting to this point in the season, and Snyder hasn't been in a game of the week for us yet.
Yeah.
Like this has to be like an all-time long stretch of a season where Snyder hasn't been in a game of the week, but because that early loss to Carroll has kind of put them behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, and I think offensively you can see them kind of maybe rounding into form a little bit. Agnes Lockett, their leading rusher. Other guys have chipped in as well at running back. Lenny has been pretty good for them as well.
Lenny Bennett.
That's right. It's such a opposite of a football name as you would expect,
hey,
right?
We've got Lenny Bennett.
He just sounds like he's out there running cross country.
He should be out there doing NASCAR.
But, the quarterback position seems to have solidified a little bit with John Barnes Jr., but I think they need more stability at that position. And I think Barnes, as he gets more comfortable, will be more of a passing threat, which I think is the key for Snyder going ahead as they enter the second half of the season to be able to potentially knock off a Homestead and these kind of teams.
Yeah, they've got some young receivers stepping up. Michael Alito Jr. has played a ton of football, despite just being a junior, but they have a receiving core, I think, that has a lot of talent. Just needs to get some more experience. Northside at Lures, when you look at the resumes of SAC teams, nobody, even though I would not put them as the number one team in the SAC, I think nobody has a better resume than Bishop Lures in terms of who they've beaten this year.
Nobody has a better 3 wins than Bishop Lures does, and that's obvious. So they are very impressive. Of course, get the overtime win over Concordia last Friday. I think you can throw that out once we get to the postseason. I think that sectional comes down to those 2 teams as well, so that should be a fun one. And Northside's just got that brutal early season schedule that it's just every week they have to answer the bell. Against a team that is exceptionally good. Alex Holiday Robinson, I think one of the better running backs in the area that doesn't get a lot of credit for Northside, still just a junior. But I see another long night for the Legends on Friday.
When you take a look at Lures, and when we talk about high school football, one of the things that the successful teams in the postseason do is learn how to win in the regular season. And if you're Kyle Lindsey, you have to be really excited, not just the caliber of teams that you've beaten, but the way you've beaten them. Justin Gaston with a touchdown, midway through the fourth quarter to beat Carroll by 1. You're talking about a last-second field goal, literally last-second field goal, and then a walk-off. Yeah, you were up 14-0 at one point, but you still come back at Concordia, send this game into double overtime, and win on a walk-off. I mean, learning to win when you're one of the smaller schools in the SAC, that has to be worth something not only in the short term, but in the long term as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the bugaboos for Lures over the last couple of years. Kyle Lindsey said we just couldn't finish football games, and they've been able to finish football games this year. All 3 wins, dramatic victories toward the end of the game. So, definitely a great point. That's going to help them as the season goes on.
Northrop at Concordia, this matchup gets a little spicier this week. When you see Northrop and the numbers that they put up last week, Bailey Mirzo, 4 total touchdowns. Obviously, Kamari Anderson-Drew has emerged as one of the better receivers in not only Northeast Indiana, but numbers-wise in the state. What do you see as being key in this matchup as Concordia looks to bounce back while Northrop looks to continue to ride a hot streak, perhaps?
And all of a sudden we look at, can anybody outscore Northrop? I mean, Wayne was able to do it by 1 point. Carroll wasn't able to do it. And I look at that Concordia defense who has had, has shined at times, struggled against other squads. Can they slow down that Northrop offense enough to be in this game? So all of a sudden, you mentioned Bailey Mirzo, Quaylen Pettis, those guys, Devion Berry, tremendous offensive skill guys. We thought last year with Keyshawn Edwards, the running back, if you added him to this offense, it'd be crazy, but they were able to get a lot of production from that running back spot this year.
Yeah. Northrop isn't an easy W on a Friday night this season, that's for sure. And that makes I think that makes the SAC more interesting because people look at Northrop and say, well, that's a big school, but a lot of their athletes are at different places.
Yeah.
That's how the parochial system works.
Right. Love it or hate it.
People will argue recruiting, whatever. That's the situation as it is. But Jason Dorfler's done a nice job, and he said it after the game. I was there for the end. He said, it doesn't really matter what we did this week if we don't turn it into a win next week and we don't use it as momentum.
Yeah, and I think in years past we've said Northrop has been a tough out on Friday nights. Kind of looking at their 6A, they have a couple athletes, they can put up points, but it was almost like we're kind of being nice to Northrop a little bit because of how big their school is. Now it's a legitimate. They can beat anybody on any given night on a Friday night. So, kudos to them. They're actually in a position where they can challenge teams.
The one thing I loved about Northrop's game against Carroll is that Carroll made the mistakes and Northrop took advantage. In years past, it's been the opposite. Northrop had some horses, but they would shoot themselves in the foot. It was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
They'd play a great first quarter and then turn the ball over twice in the second quarter and then be down a couple touchdowns after. They completely... They Northrop them.
They Northrop Carroll, yeah. And, defense was almost looked at as it's a breather for the offense kind of thing. If that defense, we always said, if that defense ever came around a little bit, that they would really be a threat. And I think the defense has made strides, at least last week, to make some plays when they needed to take the ball away or to limit Carroll. If they can consistently do that and then drop 40 points a game, they're going to win 3 or 4 more games.
Wayne Southside is the other SAC game. I know people know about Craig Young and they know about the athletes that they have, but I feel like they're kind of flying under the radar a bit at 3-1 in this conference just because of that Week 1 loss, which you can almost throw out to a certain degree because of the weather at the time.
I feel like that game's closer in the dry.
Yeah.
I definitely know that Wayne's not getting shut out. But then again, you look at what Bishop Dwenger was able to do against Homestead. A little wet on Friday, but it was on turf, and they hold Homestead to 10 points. So maybe we don't know what we're talking about, but which is very likely.
That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, Wayne 3-1. Their lone loss is to the lone undefeated in the SAC. So their schedule is backloaded.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely. So we're really going to find out about Coach Derek Moore's team. But you know, they get south. They'll be 4-1 heading into this gauntlet of a Final Four regular season games for them.
But I like that their schedule is backloaded because after that Week 1, they're now getting some confidence. And you can see Craig Young got a little bit more involved last week against Northside. And, you know, he is, by all accounts, the premier or one of the premier athletes in the SAC. And I think that bodes well long-term to get them ready for a stretch run in the SAC that is going to be brutal down the stretch when it comes down to it.
And it's always been a confident team, but now they are really riding some accolades that they've been able to put together. 4-1 after this week if they can get a win, and that defense especially needs to be ready starting next week because it's going to have to make some plays.